I believe we're live. This is where we find out. But my name is Andre Bright, burnout prevention coach. And today I wanted to do slightly differently. Usually I'd have this whole presentation, but today I'm going to be approaching this a little bit lighter than usual. The topic is quite simple, though, it's quite straightforward. It's why connection matters at the top. I- I've been a burnout coach for a number of years now. And one of the things that I found is a huge contributor to stress is how comfortable you are to be yourself, right? And in workplace, that will look at psychological safety, for example. It's a really big indicator. But what contributes to psychological safety is who you have in your corner. So who can you rely on? Who are the people who have your back? Who are the people you can lean on, you can speak to when you need trouble, when you're in trouble, when you need help? Whose relationships do you have that are strong enough to weather that storm? And what you end up finding, I'm going to give the summary at the beginning. We're going to go deep into it, and then we're going to summarize at the end. What I'm finding from my own research as well as my own work with different clients at leadership level is that the higher you go, the less support you tend to get. Usually, what I'm seeing is that as you go to the top of these companies, you find people who feel like they should know everything by now. They're probably going to be the leaders at workplace, but then they're also the leader at home. And what ends up happening is the usual spaces where most people would have to have that support disappear one by one. So if you're at delivery level, you can speak to your peers, right? So other people who are graduates, other people who are even managers, right? Your team. As you go higher up, you don't get a team. You're pretty much part of your C-suite, and you're there to answer questions, not ask them. Or at least that's what the idea is. That's what the concept is. When you're at home, you feel like you might not be able to speak to your friends and family because they won't understand what you're really going through. The kind of conversations, the kind of decisions you have to make on a daily basis are going to be those that only people who are your peers will be able to understand. But you may not be able to speak to your peers because they might be the competition, they might be the people who rely on you, they might be the people who where your position in the company are in their hands. So you might not feel comfortable enough to be truly vulnerable with them. And so you keep it to yourself. But the flip side of this is what happens when we isolate ourselves effectively. And that's one of the responses of a stress response. So you've heard of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, etc. For those of you who don't fight, for those of you who either have flight or a freeze response, it often shows as isolation. You find the place where you do feel safe, which might be alone in your own house, in your own mind. For example, you don't communicate what you're thinking to other people, maybe because it's not a finished thought, maybe because there are so many different things relying on it, and you're worried that if you were to share something that's incomplete, other people might assume it to be the final thought and make decisions accordingly. I know I've experienced that. And so you find yourself in this constant state of hiding, find yourself in a constant state of isolation, which biologically we're not designed for. We are humans who are designed for interaction, designed to be in communion with other people. And when we're not in communing with other people, we start to break, we start to bend. And really the evidence of this is in the statistics. And one of the things that I wanted to share, and I know we're jumping right into it, but it's the last day of Men's Health Month. And one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on this particular session is because I find that men have a bit of a bad rep at the moment. We are the cause of a lot of challenges that are happening in the world. And I remember doing this. I remember doing this program in Sierra Leone, and it was a girls empowerment program. And it was in response to the rate of gender-based violence against young girls, right? And so I did a girls empowerment program, and it was really great. We elevated a lot of the girls. Um, Many of them had, or they started companies, and even at like 16, 17 years old, by the time they'd gone through the program, they had hired people. Now they had looked at supply chains and business plans and all this kind of stuff, and it was incredible, giving them a lot of empowerment. But then they were going home to spaces where that kind of thinking, that kind of behavior, that kind of freedom or agency wasn't welcomed. And we realized that actually we were not looking at the source of, not necessarily the problem, but it's not like men were the problem, it's more the community thinking was the problem. So we realized we had to spread out not just a girls empowerment program, but a community empowerment program. And the reason why I'm saying this is I feel like at the moment there's been this focus on women, which is so necessary to kind of even the playing field, to give women the empowerment to stand on their own too, and not be dependent on other people, so they can make the choices that they need to, etc. But then what I feel has ended up happening is that there's a group of people who have been isolated by this, and some of these are men who are then don't feel like they can speak up because there are other people with bigger challenges. They don't feel like they can go to others because they're meant to be the provider, protector. But what happens to them when they need that support? And a lot of these frustrations come out in other ways. So this year, this Men's Month, I was hit by the statistics that I was seeing. 3 times more men than women take their own lives as a result of many things, right? Stress, etc. But the male rate is 17.6 per 100,000, 3 times the amount of women. And that's by UK stats on ONS, right? 1 in 5 men have no close friends, and that's a YouGov statistic from 2019. And I know it's been a long time, but I think I'm still waiting for the current stats to come out, and then don't look like they're being much better. And that was pre-pandemic, so I don't even know what it's going to be like now. That's double the rate of women, right? So no close friends, which means that there's an element of vulnerability that isn't happening. It's good to have friends. It's good to be able to go to social events with, laugh and joke, etc. But close friends, people you're vulnerable with, people who you share the imperfections with, there's a lack of that that's happening. Um, just having a quick check up in the chats and everything. Hey, Ailiana, pleasure to have you here. Hey, Angelica. Definitely, it's always great to know who has your back and have their backs as well. Definitely, it's a two-way street. Actually, you're right, and that's another thing that I actually come across a lot when I'm doing facilitation. There's a lot of people who are in need of that support, and you probably would have heard the phrase "it takes a village," but it also takes a villager. You have to be part of the village as well. You have to be contributing to the village to receive from it what you kind of need, and each person has different roles. I remember I recorded um podcast uh, a podcast episode yesterday with an activist called Siana Bangura from Sierra Leone, and she was talking about the social the name has escaped me, but it came out during the pandemic, which was the first time I saw it. But the social ecosystem model, and it talks about the builders, the weavers, the healers, all these kind of roles that you have within it. But each person has a role within the village. And what ends up happening is by doing your role, you're effectively investing in the village. And so you cash out when you need that help, but without cashing in or investing in, it's difficult to withdraw. And that's something that's important to recognize about the two ways. So there's a lot of people out there who are really struggling, which is a valid thing. We need that support. But the question is, how much are we putting in to be able to receive that support? And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. I did a whole workshop on this about how long it can take to invest in people to bring them in from the outskirts, your zone of influence, or whatever that might be, into your zone of friendship, your zone of reliability, etc. We also have Leanna in the building from Minnesota. What's going on? Pleasure to have you as well. And we also have Christy in the building from Florida. How you doing, Christy? Absolute pleasure to have you here. And it's also interesting as well, just to give an example, all women, right? And one of the things I've seen when it comes to events, for example, or spaces when we're looking at wellness, it's really difficult to get men in that space. I'm someone who heavily leans into the wellness space, but I'm often the only man there. And it's not that men don't have issues, it's not that men don't have problems, but they don't necessarily feel like they can go out and get the support they need, because they feel like they're ones who should be providing that support. And today I'm not necessarily focusing just on the men, but it's just because it's Men's Month, I thought it was something to acknowledge. So what the way I'm going to do this workshop, this LinkedIn Live, and I haven't done one of these in a little while, so you're going to have to bear with me while I re-facilitate myself with the space. I'm streaming live on LinkedIn, but also YouTube. So if you are watching on YouTube, put your questions and thoughts in the chat. It'd be great to have any questions you have in the chat, actually, and I'll answer them here. If you do want to join me, actually, what I'll do is I'll put the link for you to join in the LinkedIn. Let me just see if I can find that invite link. Just a moment while I do that. But while I'm doing that, if you have any questions, and I'm really open to questions, this is my bag. This is this is what I do. It's great to have a pre-made presentation. It's great to have everything prepared, etc. But I think where I really lean into is answering live questions, responding to your current needs, your thoughts, um, and doing it on the fly. I really love that. I really like being put into a position where I have to think on the spot. So if you do have a question, please do ask it. And my computer, it seems, is being overpowered by all the functions that I'm asking it to do at one time. So it's taken a while. I do have a comment here from Aloha, from Cherry. Aloha, you say, thank you. Andre, thank you for looking at prevention for men's mental health awareness. After teaching grade school for 22 years, prevention has to start as early as elementary school. I completely agree. Completely agree. With mental health assessment, so important. This screening tool is used to find out how a child is feeling and acting from our mental health counseling team. That's really good that you have that. And I think it's one of these things where when I was in school, it wasn't something that was readily available. I don't even know if it's something we did, especially at elementary level. But I feel like nowadays, and this is something that I've noticed from facilitating not just um, spaces for youth, but also spaces for adults, is the same things that are relevant for young people is also relevant for adults. So that same assessment tool, it would not surprise me if you can use the same tool for adults as well. But it's really important at elementary, because how they think then, they're in the developmental stages. So they're understanding how the world works. They're looking at patterns and all these kind of things. So if you can get a young person to understand that it's okay for them to ask questions, it's okay for them to be vulnerable, it's okay to not necessarily fall within a specific gender role, and not think that you have to be a woman to be emotionally intelligent, or you have to be a man to be financially independent. All these kind of things are structures that used to work, but I feel like the development at the moment is changing in such a way that we have to think differently. And it's good to get them at elementary stage so that the new generation is open to wider thinking. um, I'm just going to put the link within the chat on LinkedIn if anyone wants to join me on stage and share your thoughts. Okay, perfect. I have just put that in there. So if anyone would like to join me, all you have to do is click on the link I've just put into the chats on LinkedIn. So it might mean you coming out slightly to have a look there. But then once you see it, click the link and I should be able to see you pop up and you can join me. Because that's a really good point, Cherry, about the assessments in elementary school. I think we need an overhaul on how we approach mental health. I had a conversation yesterday or the day before about how mental health should be taken just as seriously as physical health. I mean, it's slowly starting to become the conversation that's more common, but I think I've realized in certain spaces it's still a little bit of an alien concept. But in the same way as how we have a GP who is in charge of our physical health, they understand us with they are our GP longitudinally, right? So they've seen us as a child, they've seen us grow up, they understand where how our body works and how it doesn't work. So when they are offering us solutions or prescriptions or anything like that, they are fully aware of our existing conditions. In the same way, I feel like our mental health should be treated the same way. We may have a checkup every 3 to 6 months, if not regularly, more regularly than that. And it's not necessarily a um, we talked about, Cherry, you mentioned prevention. It's not prevention is better than cure, right? So you don't wait until the problems are there before you start putting in the tools to prevent the issue. Because what you actually find is all of the things that we do to get us out of mental health challenges are the same things that would help prevent us falling back into it again. Now, what usually happens is it works as a cycle. And really, as a coach, this is what I help people break the cycle of, is that you feel okay and then something happens, the stress gets beyond your window of tolerance and there's a break, right? You reach your limit and you start to crash. Even while you're crashing, you don't necessarily put anything in place. It's usually it deteriorates. You probably do the things that aren't great for you. You start to go to non healthy coping mechanisms. You might turn to drinking or isolation or narcotics or buying things or eating things, or all these kind of things are coping mechanisms. Actually, that's your body telling you there's some kind of instability, there's some kind of need, but you're reaching for something to fill that need that doesn't actually help you in the long term. But then you get to a point where you reach your limit of that. And that's what they usually call rock bottom. That's when the pain of staying the same is more than the pain of the change. And the pain of the change is changing our behavior, it's changing our thinking, it's changing the people who are around us, it's changing our environments, it's taking action, it's breaking the cycle. So you start to implement, you either start to stop doing something or you start doing something or change how you do something. Those are like the three things I usually help people look at. Starting something might be too much at one point. You might already feel like you're overwhelmed. So starting to go to the gym, starting to eat healthy, etc., might feel like something extra to do on your plate. So the first stage of that might be stopping to do something, right? And in this case, it might be if we're talking about connection, it might be that, okay, cool. So I need to spend less time with certain types of groups of people, which actually gives you more capacity to spend more time with the groups that are filling you. I talk a lot in my relief framework about energy management, not just time management. Time management is what people usually think about, is how to manage your daily activities, etc. But it doesn't necessarily think about how you spend time with the right person all day and you leave feeling energized after 8 hours. You spend 20 minutes with the wrong person and you feel drained for the rest of the week. So it's not just time management, it's also energy management. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Christy. Tete says, where can I access an assessment tool? There's actually quite a lot of assessment tools available. You can look online. One thing I would say is actually go to your HR if you're working within an organization. They do have their access to HR assessment tools, different ones as well. If you let them know that you're interested in that, it might be something that is part of their health insurance. I know where I worked, they had a whole suite of assessments that came as part of the health insurance. I didn't anyway, know that I had access to it unless I went to ask them. So it's definitely worth looking at. or otherwise look online. There's quite a lot of free tools available. There's quite a lot of assessments. It's just that the ones which are really good, sometimes you might have to pay, which is why I say go through your work or your insurance. But there are quite a lot available there, Tete. So it might be worth looking there. Welcome back. Thank you. I appreciate it. I know I felt like I've been away for quite some time, so it's nice to be back with these. And I think what I'll do next time is maybe ask some specific individuals if you'd like to share the stage with me. Uh, if anybody does want to join me on stage, you can still use the link that I've put in the LinkedIn chat. So feel free to do that. It'll be great to have you here. Christy says mental health is health. Absolutely. Mental health really is health. It's all part of the same thing. Physical, mental, emotional health are just they're all parts of the same pie. And as a coach, it's really important to think holistically. So there are psychosomatic illnesses as well. Like, there are things that are to do with the mind as well as the body, as well as there's the gut mind connection. All these kind of things are all to do with each other. And you realize that when you start to look at patterns, I start to behave this way when this happens, or this happens with my body when this is happening outside of my body. Is it that you experience grief a certain way and you don't feel like you have safe spaces to talk about it? So you don't talk about it at all. But what that ends up meaning is that emotion has nowhere to go, and you take it out. It shows up in poor performance. It shows out in isolating for people. It shows up in you snapping, for example. All those things can have a connected effect, right? So when it talks about things like suicide and having no close friends and risk of loneliness, for example, a lot of these can be attached to your physical health, your career, etc., but they are still attached to your mental health as well. um, Dr. Marcia, so good to see you. I always say self-care and soul are as important as loyalty. Sorry, self-care and soul are more important than loyalty and commitment because it's the firm foundation. Yes, indeed. Um, it's our relationships with ourselves are the most important relationship we're going to have. Apart from, if you're a spiritual, for example, your relationship with God, for example, is going to be something that you might be rooted in. But the relationship with ourselves, this is the only relationship that you're going to be experiencing 24/7 all the way through your life. So I'm 41 right now. I've had 41 years of experience with this person. And so the question then is, do I enjoy being around this person? Do I have a relationship where I care for them like I care for the other people? Are they in my priority list at all? You know, am I feeding it well? Not just in terms of physically, in terms of healthy foods, but am I feeding it in terms of mentally? Who am I feeding it in terms of who I'm putting around it, right? All these things are attached to my soul, my spirit, my physical, my mental, my emotional balance. You know, do I listen? Do I know its needs? Am I able to recognize when there is an imbalance or something that's in need? Right? All these things might be happening without me realizing. Yeah. But if you're not spending time with yourself, if you run away from that time, if you feel like any time you are spent time alone, people are scared of time alone. People do all they can to avoid it, but it's probably the most valuable thing you'll probably be able to do. Do we spend enough time with ourselves? Do we listen to our bodies? Do we listen to our minds? Do we listen to our spirits and give it what it needs? Or do we hide away from that? Do we avoid it? All things to consider. Cherry says, hmm. Okay, you're speaking to each other. I love that. Definitely communicate with each other. And yeah, actually, speaking about it, since this is all about connection, if you don't know somebody who's in the chat, please do reach out to each other, make connections. You never know when a connection might be valuable to you. I mean, all connections are valuable, but you'd be surprised. There are some times where things happen and it's the people who you would expect to show up in a certain way might not, and the people who you don't expect might show up in the most incredible ways. And I've made incredible connections from LinkedIn, from a lot of these spaces. You who are in the room as well are some of them. I've had calls with many of you. I've been to some of your sessions. You've been to mine. But then also just generally chit chat outside of this. And you'll be surprised how much that has helped me as an individual. I had a client call today, and they were asking me, how do I deal with stress? Do I get stressed? And I was like, of course I get stressed. I'm a human being. It's just that a part of the reason why I'm able to relate to people who struggle with stress is that I struggle with stress too, but I just have the tools to be able to implement them. And I've test everything. And because I test everything, I get to know what works for me as an individual, which means that when I am experiencing the same stress as someone else, I might be able to deal with it better. But it's not because I'm not human. It's just because I've practiced the art of testing these tools. Um, I've got Iliana has said, for anyone looking for a free confidential mental health check-in, here are a few trusted resources. Fantastic. Thank you for that, Iliana. That's great. So we've got perfect. I've put that on screen as well for anyone who's looking at that from YouTube. But if you're on LinkedIn, if you look at the chats, you'll be able to click on those links and get all the help you need. I think it's really important right now. There's lots of assessments are really good because they kind of give you an idea of where you're at. And then the next step is figuring out what to do from there. And for that, you might need someone who's a medical professional or a professional or coach or or something like that to be able to help you through it. It might be therapy, it might be all those kind of things, right? So it's good to have personal and professional support systems, right? And this all goes to connection, right? I did a workshop recently on networking, and the root of networking is connection, right? But we often think about I think one of the reasons why we don't like networking is because we feel like we don't want it to be transactional. I feel like we have a lot of mission-led people in the room. I feel like we have a lot of heart seekers in the room. So we don't like to feel like a number. We don't like to feel like a thing. We like to feel like a human being. And when we're not treated like such, it puts us off this idea of connection with other people, and we find ourselves guarded. But what ends up happening is we lose the very thing that we're seeking. And so if we look at things differently, and whether it's networking, whether it's relationships, and I don't just mean romantic, I mean friendships, family, it can be co-workers, it mean professional relationships as well. When we look at being in relationship with another, how can we do that in such a way that there's genuine connection? And part of that is what do we share? How vulnerable can we be? In how do we create the environments that allow us to be vulnerable in a safe space? Um, I know I'm talking about a lot of things right now, so any questions and thoughts, put them in the chat. But one of the things I heard recently, which was really important thought actually, is that I heard someone say that safe spaces don't exist. Um, and what they meant by that is not necessarily that there's no safe spaces around, but it's like what we imagine about safe spaces is that nothing goes wrong or nothing becomes difficult. But actually, safe spaces is more like having padded walls and floors. You will fall, but the idea is, will you be held when you do? That is what creates a safe space. And I think that if we look for relationships where nothing ever goes wrong, and the moment that when anything does, we sever that tie, then we'll never really find what a truly safe space actually is. A safe space for me is when I can be vulnerable. I can pull up someone on their behavior, and they can pull up myself on my behavior. And it's taken with love because I know that they're doing this because they care for me and I care for them. And I will listen to them and I'll take it on board and I will apply what I'm learning because I know it's coming from a space of eagerness. It's coming from a place of support and gentle and caring, etc. Their delivery might be sharp, but it's coming from a space where they actually want me to do well. They want me to improve and develop and be the kind of person that I want to be. And I find that if we don't allow ourselves to be in spaces where we can be critiqued for the better, where we can be held accountable, for example, then we don't really get to that stage of connection where we actually need, where we can just bear all. Because you won't feel like you can bear all if you haven't tested those waters, right? So Dr. Marcia says the body is the only place that we will always live. That needs to be on a badge or something. Please put that on something, a post, a t-shirt, whatever it might be. The body is the only place that we will always live. It really is. And it's the one place we've been living before we were born, right? It grew around us, right? Our body is the only thing that we will have until we die. It's the only thing. So let's care for it. Not just the physical, but the mental and emotional, the spiritual, all those things. Dr. Marcio mentioned the soul earlier on, right? Like your connection to the wider, the spiritual, the nature, to all these wider things that are bigger than us. And she also says, Ileana, where workforce meets purpose, great contributions. Yeah, definitely. Where workforce meets purpose, really, really important. I find one of the things in my framework is the relief framework. The I is for inner alignment. And I think I need to break that down into the various levels, because I feel like under inner alignment are so many different levels, but one of them is purpose, right? Are you in purpose? Are you moving in purpose? Have you given yourself purpose, or are you following the purpose of others, which means there might be misalignment? Are you walking your own path? Are your thoughts, your actions, your deeds all in alignment? And when they are, you find that you live a less stressed life, and not necessarily that there's no stress. It's just that less, what's the word I'm looking for, less distressed life, right? Because you can have eustress, EUSTRESS, which is the good kind of stress, which keeps you motivated, it keeps you in flow state, it keeps you concentrated, it keeps you purposeful, all those kind of things. But distress, which is the kind of stress that we don't really want to be completely what's the word I'm looking for, overwhelmed with, is the kind of stress that can break us over time. It can lead you to my desk as the burnout prevention coach, right? So yeah, Dr. Gwendolyn, you said so true, but I'm not sure what you were referring to, if it was something I said, or what Dr. Marcia was putting in the chats, or any of the other comments. It would be great to hear what resonated with you. Okay, so Dr. Gwendolyn, you said, how clear and concrete is your vision? Absolutely. How clear and concrete is your vision? The vision is an important one, actually, because it's your direction, right? And it's difficult to know if you're moving towards your vision or not if you don't have one. I feel like a lot of people inherit visions from their parents, from their bosses, from their co-workers. They are dictated to in terms of what they should be, who they should be. But ultimately, the vision comes from within. It's something that is projected from within. I read a book called The Kabbalion, and it's a really, really old book. Um, I feel like it's one of the books that this modern day um, concepts of wellness are based on. And one of the 7 principles is so within, so without, right? And we've all heard that, but it is one of the oldest dated books that I've heard um, that point made. Vision is from within, that is manifested without, right? And you'll notice this because 2, 3 people will see the same things physically, but see different things in terms of their vision, right? We can all in this group go into a house, but who we are is going to dictate what we see. Me as an architect, I might be looking at the structure. I might be looking at The architect version of me might be looking at the structure, it might be looking at the walls, the materials, the spatial design, all this kind of stuff. Me as the dancer might be looking at how I feel as I walk into the space. Is this spatial enough? Do I feel light? Do I feel like I can connect with people? Do I feel like this space is the kind of space where I want to stay? What happens within my nervous system as I walk through the door? All these kind of things. Our vision is different depending on who we are, even though we're looking at the same thing. So going back to what you said, Dr. Gwendolyn, I feel like there's an element of knowing thyself, which will have an impact on what our vision actually is, but also it's how concrete it is. Does it change over time? Do we, because I think there's an element of vision being clear, but the concrete part might take a while. In the same, if we were to use concrete as a concept, it takes a while to set, right? It might require certain experiences. It might require certain conversations. Me, for example, I have a vision of building a performing arts village in Sierra Leone, which is one of the ways where all of my skills can come into one. My dance background comes in because obviously it's a performing arts village and I get to work with creatives. My architecture background comes into there because obviously the design of the space, knowing how people move within space and interact with each other, etc. But also the coaching side of the space and having that professional development and therapy and all these kind of things involved in supporting the creatives, but then also having the enterprise, the business side of me that comes into it as well, which looks at what is the training programs, the programming that happens through the year. How is it going to be connected to this cycle of flow of finances, so we don't have to apply for grants all the time? How can it be so that it's a place which is a hub for creative festivals and all this kind of stuff, which will also generate their own income, but then also attract investors, for example? How can I, for me, as that only got to that concrete level of vision when I had certain experiences through life, right? I had to be open to the idea that I can have an experience tomorrow which will refine that vision into something a little bit clearer. And once I know what that is, I can see who else will be on par with this as well. We've got the social, what's the word I'm going? I think the social change model, something like that, which is a business model that we use where you're looking at the purpose of your business, right? So I want to make this kind of impact in the world, and you put it through the model, and then on the part of the model you look at who else is creating that impact with you, and you might find that those might be your points of connection that might be missing. I right now need people in my life who are really passionate about X, Y, and Z, and that becomes your community, right? And the thing about community is that might be where your connections lie. They don't necessarily have to be in the workplace, they can be outside of that. They don't have to be within your family. It can be with your friends. It doesn't have to be with your friends. It can be with your wider community. It can be people who are just you met at a rally or at a festival or a fair or a conference. People who are interested in the same things that you're interested in, who care about the same things you care about, where you have that common ground, where when you speak to them about certain topics, you feel alive, you feel purposeful, like was mentioned before. You feel like your vision becomes more and more clear the more you are in those spaces. When you feel that, those are the kind of connections that can help you away from the statistics that we're talking about today. And you don't have to be a man for that to apply, right? But men, I feel, are the ones that seem to be statistically suffering the most. And I think it's not just because we don't have the spaces, but it's we don't know how to navigate what we haven't been taught. And this is a generalized statement, obviously. With anything that's said, there are nuanced experiences, but I'm just looking at the statistics: 3 times more male suicide than women. There's a reason for that. When you look at what that's all those things are connected with, things like connection are part of that story. So what can we do about that? How can we build those connections that are real connections where I feel supported? I feel like a specific type of role or industry which encourages certain types of depth of relationship, which isn't necessarily mandated if you are in other industries. For example, I'm in wellness, so I'm expected to be vulnerable. I'm expected to be i- 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 to be engaging in self-care and self-love practices. I'm expected to be open to a certain extent, but also expected to have my boundaries in place. I'm expected to have all these things, but they're not guaranteed. It's only because I've tested these things and I've gone over and over and over them again. And when it comes to these statistics and how they tie into our connections with other people, I feel like there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we get to the stage where it's almost normal to have those assessments that we talked about earlier on, mental health assessments at what was the stage we talked about earlier? I think it was from Cherry that we were talking about it at elementary level, for example, as Cherry said, right? All those things, getting to the stage where we find those things as normal. So that, okay, cool, I'm struggling with this right now. I'm going to see my therapist. I'm going to see my coach. I'm going to book in an emergency session with my mentor, you know, all these things so that, or I'm going to go to grandma's house. One of the things, actually, this is really side note, but when we look at the core of what connection is, I feel like we sometimes run a risk of putting an image of what that should look like, which means that people who actually do have access to community or action don't feel like they do because it doesn't look like it's marketed as. I'll give you an example. Therapy, what comes to mind when you think of therapy? It'll be great to see what you think in the chats. When you think of therapy, what comes to mind? What does it look like? Because I think when me included, when I first saw therapy displayed, what it looked like was a professional on a chair and someone lying down, and there was loads of earth tones in the room, and there was probably like sounds of moving water in the background and all that kind of stuff, and they spoke with really soft voices, and someone's got a notepad and they're writing all these notes and all these kind of things. And honestly, they didn't really look like me. They didn't look like any spaces I was privy to at the time. There was nothing about it that I could relate to. But then when I really understood what therapy does, I realized, wait, me as a Sierra Leonean, therapy is part of our culture. That's my grandma is my therapist, right? My aunts are my therapist. My uncles are my therapist. We have these kind of relationships where we go to the foot of our elders and we receive healing. When we break it down at that kind of level, you realize actually my barber is my therapist. I have loads of spaces where I've experienced this thing called therapy. Therapy feels like support, 100%. Definitely, Christy. Relaxing, 100%. And one of the things I'd say about relaxing, if you think about relaxing as a physiological thing, how does it feel? Relaxing feels like release, right? If you think about how you were too relaxed, it means that you were tense in some way. And then there's some kind of release. Your nervous system finds some kind of settling motion. Your muscles are not tense anymore. They're releasing whatever they had. They're letting go. All these things are in around this word called relaxing. And then you can think, okay, in what spaces do I feel relaxed? Is it that it's whenever I go to the pool? Is it that maybe, okay, I'm going to give you a really random example here. This is a bit of a segue, but it's just to open our minds on what all these things are. There is a documentary on Netflix about a tightrope walker. And one of the interviews he received, they asked him, like, how do you do this? It must be so scary up top. How do you control your nerves? And he said, well, actually, I'm the most calm when I'm up thousands of feet up in the air because I have to be. If I'm not, I will fall and die. Right. But what he was saying is that he gets to a state of relaxation, a state of calm, a state of focus, a state of clarity to be able to tightrope from one mountaintop to another on a string. And he's actually the most calm and serene when he is in that state. And so when we think about relaxing as a state, how often do we experience that? Is it that we haven't experienced that in months, maybe? We've had so many deadlines, we've had so many responsibilities in and outside of work, we've had so many people relying on us that we don't feel like we can relax. We even get to sleep and we don't relax because we wake up still stressed and we have nightmares in between. All these kind of things. Do we struggle to fall asleep when we're alone because our mind is going 1,000 miles an hour? When do we actually feel relaxed? Um, Cherry says, as you sow, so shall you reap. 100%. The ancient spiritual truth suggests our external reality acts as a mirror to internal state. 100%, 100%. Completely agree. And so I'll give you another example, right? And this is not necessarily about sowing and reaping, but just this mirror image of our internal and external state. For me, when I come into my room or my flat or wherever I'm staying and it's a mess, I know that something's happening up here. I know. When I can see the environment is chaotic, I know it's a mirror of what's happening internally. And usually that's the case. Usually it's happening in a period of transition, or I've had back to back things that's been happening and I haven't had a chance to clear my space. Doing my bed is the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. So if I come to the end of the day and my bed's a mess, there's things on the floor, I haven't done the laundry, there's things, scattered all over the place, then I know that I have not found this state of relaxation, that the external is mirroring the internal, where I'm not at rest, I'm not at peace, I'm not at clarity, right? So going back to what Cherry was saying about the ancient spiritual truth, your external reality acts as a mirror to your internal state. So if you're feeling lonely, what's that reflection of the external? Is it that because you can be around lots of people but still feel lonely? It's not about how many people you know, it's about who you have deep connections with. And this is something that many people suffer with, right? So you can be in a crowd, you can be on stage, you can be the person that everyone wants to be around, but you don't feel like you. There's a lot of people I know who, for example, tell me about how everyone says they're their best friend, but they're like, they're not mine best friend. They're barely an acquaintance to me, but because of the space I offer to them, they feel like they can rely on me. They feel like they can come to me with anything. They feel like they can open up. They feel. But me, I don't feel like that. And sometimes it's not about who is around. Sometimes it's permission. What are we still dealing with that doesn't allow us to open up, doesn't allow us to be vulnerable, to be able to create these connections with other people, with other people. One moment. Not sure if you could hear the dog in the background. What was I saying? So, talking about connections, yes, permission is really important. Do you give people permission to be close to you? Or have you been burned so much that you've got walls up and you're guarded and you end up pushing away the very thing that could help you? And it's for a cause, it's for a reason. You don't want to be burnt again. People have abused your integrity, they've abused your generosity, they've abused your ability to create safe spaces without seemingly investing in you as much as you invest in them. So you don't want that anymore, right? So but what that means is that now the criteria to come anywhere near you has got so high that no one is able to scale that wall, and you feel alone as a result, even in the middle of a crowd. Even though you're giving so much to other people, the very thing that you're in need of, you won't allow people to give it to you because you're questionable about their intentions because other people have used it against you. All these kind of things can come into a place where we end up feeling alone. And loneliness, I think, is a real pandemic. I know we've had a pandemic already, but I feel like this is something that's surging through the world, especially as we go digital, especially as things like AI seem to be used as therapists, as friends now. People are going to technology to fill that gap where humans can't, because the technology is always going to tell you what you want to hear, but it's not necessarily going to be that deep connection that you're looking for in a person. um First, we're coming to the end, maybe about 8 minutes to go. It'd be great to hear what other thoughts and questions you might have, and if you have any questions, put them in the chats. I would happily answer them. And also, thank you everyone for being here so far. We've had Iliana, we've had Angelica, we've had Liana, we've had Christy, we've had Cherry, we've had Sherry, we've had Tete, we've had Dr. Marcia, we've had Dr. Gwendolyn. So many people have been here today, and it's been really valuable hearing your thoughts, your questions, your contributions. What's your relationship with other people, with connection? Because it, and how does it influence your performance? That's the other part of this session I wanted to touch on before we kind of close up, is that if we don't feel connected, if we don't feel like we have trust in ourselves or other people, it can actually affect our performance, not just in terms of, our goals per se, or our performance in terms of work, but how we function. It can have an impact. This very systems that can be working to help us on a day to day can falter as a result. And we see this with stress, right? So stress is a biological phenomenon as well as anything psychological. So, hormone levels of cortisol and adrenaline, it's fight or flight, it's our limbic system, just all sorts of things that are working together, right? Until they're not, until they're overwhelmed and they break. So if you don't feel safe, for example, because you don't have a circle of people around you to support you, how you act, or what you might accept for yourself, what you might believe about yourself or about others might change, which will affect the decisions you make, right? So it actually is all connected to each other. And so a question I'll ask you is, how might connection be affecting your performance at the moment? And not just professional performance, but also personal performance. Is it that you're feeling detached from the people you love? Is it that you're having a lack of trust in certain areas with people who don't deserve that lack of trust? They themselves individually have always shown up for you consistently, but because the lack of trust in this area is happening, it's making you question everything, which means that you're starting to grow a shell when you used to be quite open. You know, I had another client, I want to say on Monday, which was yesterday, who was talking about how different this year has been. He had an experience a year ago which really shattered his trust in self as well as other people, which means that now his relationship with other people is so different that he doesn't even recognize himself anymore. In what ways is stress or loneliness or connection or lack of affecting your performance in other ways? And I'm going to give you a clue. It doesn't necessarily reduce your performance either. One thing that's really interesting is when all of this leads to higher performance. So, because you feel like you can't rely on anyone else, you feel like you have to do everything yourself. And as the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. But fast might be what people are seeing, what you're seeing. You might say to yourself, I don't need anyone else. I'm able to get to managerial level. I've become a director recently. I'm ready to get to C-suite. I'm smashing it in terms of my numbers, my figures, and that's without anybody. I don't have to rely on anybody or anything, right? And you might be looking at your performance as the only measure without realizing that that the only reason why the performance is at the level that you're at might be because it's a response to a lack somewhere else. And a question I often get is, you know, what if I go to therapy or go to coaching and I feel just complacent and I don't perform as well, right? And to be honest with you, I think that's a certain myth that people carry a lot of the time. There is a level of agency, a level of spaciousness, a level of understanding that comes as a result of understanding your own behavior as well as everyone else's. But it doesn't mean that your performance will drop. It just means that the reason why you're performing that way changes. So instead of me performing highly because I'm effectively scared to share it with anybody else, which means that I become over controlling. And remember, just because it's functioning now doesn't mean it will always function this way. If you're trying to get your next promotion, it might be great to single yourself out as the person who's performing the best by doing all that work. But that's not going to work once you're part of a team. That's not going to work once you have to work with clients a certain way. It's not going to work when you become sick and you realize that actually no one else can pick up the work for you. So it's not necessarily a long-term solution. And once we think about performance, not just in the moment, but as a sustainable vehicle, then we have to change the way we look at it. And doing everything alone is not a sustainable option in the long run. And ultimately, a lot of the things that I've seen as well is people say, yeah, but I can do it myself. But the question for me is, would you choose to? If you had someone you could trust, would you choose to? And do you only feel that way because you don't feel like you have the right connections or people around you? And if that's the case, it's not that you doing it alone is the only option. It's just that it's the only option that feels open to you right now, which can change over time. And as I did a workshop on this before, one thing I'd state is that it takes time to build these connections. It won't happen overnight. If you want to build a relationship where you can rely on your team, it might take a couple of months, maybe 3 to 6 months of iterated ideas and working together on different kinds of projects under different kinds of pressures before we get to the stage. Ooh, can you all hear me? I hope you can hear me. If you can hear me, let me know in the chats. And if you can't hear me, let me know in the chats as well. Can you hear me? I've just realized the microphone wasn't flashing all this time. Hopefully you can. Okay. I think I'm going to change just a moment. Hopefully you can hear me here. So I think that's pretty much it for today. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Let's keep this conversation going. What has resonated with you today? What question has been left with you? What are you going to do as a result of this presentation, this conversation? What is a first action? Where might the gaps be with your connections? What kind of connections might you actually need? And what will you do to build them? And how much time are you going to give yourself? Be realistic about that. Thank you, Aliana. Appreciate it. I was worried there for a second. So any last questions before I go? Any last question at all? It'd be great to hear from you. It's okay to beat to your own tune. Oh, sorry. So Aliana says, it's okay to beat to your own tune. We don't all heal the same way, lead the same way, or grow at the same pace, 100%. And that's okay. Your story, your rhythm, and your journey matter. Keep showing up as the authentic you. The world needs more originals, not more copies. And especially in the world that we're going into at the moment, where everything seems to be copied, everything can be duplicated, it seems. What's really going to be important, and I had a conversation about this recently, is your ability to be yourself. One of the things that I've noticed is that, AI, for example, as great as it is, as fantastic as a tool as it is, it's acting like fire or the wheel or, you know, the first computer, in the sense that it's changing the way we interact with each other. It's like the factories, all these kind of improvements in technology. It's just one of the things that's shifting things so incredibly much. But I feel like the flip side of that is that it's generating the things that we used to generate, so that a lot of people aren't thinking anymore. And so we're inundated with AI based content, which can be, what's the word I'm looking for? Which I think can actually dictate how we think, funnily enough. Like, I've noticed myself writing posts on LinkedIn, and I read it back and I'm like, oh, that felt a bit AI, because just because I've heard these patterns of speech so often, that I'm like, I'm realizing I'm starting to consume so much of it. It's starting to go into my psyche, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. So I'm starting to read less posts online and go back to the books, go back to the podcasts where people are writing from their own experiences. Because the world needs more originals, not more copies. Absolutely, Aliena. Yeah. So I think that's going to be it for today. One thing I will give you a heads up about, I'm going to do a workshop in July. I'm not quite sure what the topic is going to be, but it's probably going to be something around the pressure at the top. So as a coach, I work with mm, senior managers, basically senior leadership. So senior managers, directors, CEOs, for example, and they have a very specific set of pressures up at that level. And so I'm going to be talking about the pressure at the top. Even things like today, I've mentioned it at the very beginning of this LinkedIn Live, where the higher you go, the less support there is. And there was actually statistics. There was a research recently which was talking about how, I think, first time managers become managers maybe in their 20s, but they get their training in their 40s, which means that they're really winging it for most of their career. But then also, once you get to director level, the same um, resources, the same benefits, the same tools, and everything that you get as you're coming up the ranks don't become as accessible to you at your level. So there's very few spaces for support as you get to that director and C-suite level. So it's important to be aware of that. Ileana says, as we embrace AI, let's remember humans lead AI, not the other way around. Technology should empower our journey, not define it. Absolutely. And it's really important, because without us having that agency, without us being aware of that, we can fall victim to just being a passenger all the time, quite literally, like the self-driving cars. Self-driving cars were designed to make things easier for us. But when we become the complete passenger, and we leave everything up to that technology, then the question is, who is leading who? And will we notice when that shift happens? And will we be prepared to be able to take back the reins if not? So definitely make sure to empower yourself on your own journey, not letting technology define it, or other people. We are the people who have to live with the consequences of our own decisions, right? No matter what we hand over to someone else. So one of the things that comes up in training a lot is people think other people should do certain things for them, or etc. But really, it's us that make the decisions. It's us that choose. It's us that decide, which means to cut off all the other options and commit to one. And then once we do that, we also have to accept the responsibility. And that's good as well as bad, right? We often think accepting responsibility is a negative thing. I did something wrong, so I have to, own up to it. But it's also good if I chose to do this thing and it worked, then I did good. I decided to focus for the next 3 months and got the role that I wanted. I started the business that I needed. I made that decision or connection that I needed at the time, and it's flourished as a result. I made that decision, I committed to it, and now I've been able to take responsibility for it as a positive, and no one else defined that for me. I didn't rely on someone else to do any of that. I did that. So thank you so much, everyone, for today. I hope today has been valuable. One thing I'd love is, if we're not connected already, definitely follow me on LinkedIn, on YouTube. I'm going to be doing more of these, but probably not weekly. Like I think back in the day, I used to do them weekly. It's probably more like monthly. There will be a live about the pressure at the top in July, but there's also going to be, for those of you who are in London, there is going to be an in-person event in August, which is going to be a half-day event where I'm going to be opening a not mastermind. It's going to be a membership group in September. It's an annual membership group for senior leaders, like I mentioned before. But in that half day, we're going to be doing exercises like you will see within the membership. So it gives you a taste of what the membership is going to be about. And really, it's going to look at peer facilitation and learning. It's going to look at group coaching. It's going to look at my creative practices that I use to help you make decisions, to make you solve problems. All these kind of things is going to involve some of the coaching in a fishbowl way. It's going to give you exercises to find clarity within yourself. All these kind of things that help release the stress, the distress that you have in your lived experience, so it leaves more space for eustress, the EUSTRESS. So I'm really looking forward to sharing those things with you over the next few months. Hopefully I'll see you then. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, all those kind of things. And we will and link with each other as well, especially those who have been conversing, the people who were watching it or clicked attending but haven't been able to attend. Have a look at who is interested in this kind of topic. Like I said earlier on, part of our community might be built of people who have overlapping interests. Well, if you go to an event that you're interested in, look at other people who sign up for that event, and maybe connect with them too. That would be like a small tip as a way to start um, that journey of embracing connection with others. All right. Thank you very much. And I will see you again in July for another live event.